Margaret Thompson's hands were shaking when she opened the door. A dying man collapsed at her feet. His lips were blue, his skin was gray, and on his leather jacket, the Hells Angels patch that made her blood run cold. Every instinct screamed to slam the door, to call 911, to protect herself. But then she saw his eyes, terrified, desperate, begging. She thought of her son Danny, who died alone on a roadside because nobody stopped to help. Margaret grabbed the stranger and dragged him inside. 7 days later, 47 motorcycles thundered into her driveway. The man she saved was standing in front. Behind him stood an army of leather and chrome. "I told you I wouldn't forget," he said. "Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and follow this story until the end. Comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled." The banging on Margaret Thompson's door came at 11:47 p.m. She jumped so hard she spilled coffee down her sweater. Nobody knocked on her door anymore. Not since Danny, not since Frank, not since the world had slowly forgotten she existed. The banging came again, harder. Margaret grabbed the baseball bat Frank had kept by the door for 30 years. Her hands shook. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it wanted to escape. "Who's there?" she called out. No answer, just the howling wind. Then a voice, weak, desperate. "Please help me. I'm dying out here." Margaret's nursing instincts kicked in before her fear could stop her. 41 years in emergency rooms. 41 years of running toward crisis, not away from it. Her body moved before her mind could object. She yanked open the door. The man collapsed at her feet. "Oh my God!" Margaret dropped to her knees. He was old, 75 at least. His skin had turned grayish blue. Hypothermia. She'd seen it 100 times. His lips were purple, his breathing barely visible. He wore a leather jacket completely wrong for this weather. Then she saw the patch. Hells Angels. Margaret's hand froze on his shoulder. Every news story she'd ever seen flashed through her mind. Violence, drugs, murder. Frank had always said to lock the doors when bikers passed through town. "Those people are dangerous, Maggie. Don't ever forget it." The man's eyes opened. Barely. "Please," he whispered, "don't leave me out here. I don't want to die alone." Margaret looked at his face. Really looked. Past the patch, past the leather, past everything she'd been taught to fear. She saw a dying old man. She saw someone's father. She saw Danny 5 years ago lying on that roadside. Alone. Nobody had stopped to help him. By the time the ambulance arrived, "Can you move?" Margaret asked. Her voice was steady now, professional. I don't think so." "Then hold on to me." She grabbed him under his arms and pulled. He was heavy, but Margaret had spent 4 decades lifting patients twice his size. She dragged him across the threshold and kicked the door shut against the screaming wind. "What's your name?" she demanded, already stripping off his wet jacket. Walter Brennan." "Okay, Walt, I'm Margaret. I'm a nurse, retired. But I haven't forgotten a damn thing." She threw blankets over him. "You're hypothermic. Your core temperature is probably below 90 degrees. If I don't warm you up in the next hour, you're going to die. Do you understand me?" Walt nodded weakly. "Good. Now stay awake. That's an order." She ran to the kitchen. Hot water bottles, warm compresses. She turned the oven to 400 and opened the door. She put water on for soup. She moved like she was 30 again, like the arthritis didn't exist, like her knees weren't screaming with every step. When she came back, Walt's eyes were closing. "Hey." She slapped his cheek. Not hard, but enough. "I said stay awake." His eyes snapped open. "You fall asleep, you might not wake up. Is that what you want?" "No, ma'am." "Then keep those eyes on me." She pressed hot water bottles against his core. She wrapped him in every blanket she owned. She made him drink warm water, small sips, even when he tried to refuse. "Drink it," she commanded. "I can't." "I didn't ask if you could. I told you to drink." Walt drank. For the next 2 hours, Margaret worked on him like he was the only patient in the world. She checked his fingers for frostbite. She monitored his breathing. She fed him soup spoonful by spoonful when his hands shook too much to hold the bowl. Finally, around 2 a.m., his color started coming back. "You are going to live," Margaret announced. "Congratulations." Walt let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "You always this bossy." I spent 41 years telling people what to do. Old habits. Your patients must have loved you. The ones who listened lived. That's all that mattered. Walt studied her face. Why did you help me? What? You saw the patch. I know you did. Most people would have left me on that porch. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down in the chair across from him. 5 years ago, she said slowly, my son died in a motorcycle accident. He was riding home from work. Some drunk ran a red light. Danny never saw him coming. Walt's face changed. He lay on that road for 23 minutes before anyone stopped. 23 minutes. Cars drove right past him. People saw him and kept going. Margaret's voice cracked. The paramedic told me later that if someone had stopped, if someone had just applied pressure to the wound, he might have made it. Jesus, Walt breathed. So when I opened that door tonight and saw you dying on my porch, I didn't see a Hell's Angel. I saw my son. I saw every person who kept driving that night when they should have stopped. She met his eyes. I couldn't save Danny, but I could save you. Walt said nothing. What could he say? They sat in silence for a while, the only sound of the wind battering the old house and the tick of the clock on the wall. My son's dead too, Walt finally said. Margaret looked up. Cancer, pancreatic, found it too late. His voice was rough. Tommy was 47, same age I was when he was born. He fought for 8 months. I watched him waste away to nothing. Walt pulled the blankets tighter. His grave is about 40 miles north, next to his mother. I was riding up to visit him. It's his birthday tomorrow. In January in this weather, he was born in a blizzard. Seemed right to visit him in one. Walt shook his head. Stupid. I'm a stupid old fool. Ran out of gas about a mile back. Started walking. Thought I could make it to a gas station. You almost died. I know. He looked at her. But I didn't, because of you. Margaret stood abruptly. I'll make more soup. Margaret. She stopped. Thank you, Walt said. I mean it. You didn't have to do this, but you did. Anyone would have. No, his voice was firm. No, they wouldn't have. And we both know it. Margaret didn't answer. She just went to the kitchen and put more water on the stove. Around 3 a.m., Walt's strength returned enough for him to sit up properly. Tell me about your husband, he said. Margaret turned from the stove. How did you know I was married? Wedding ring, you're still wearing it. She looked down at her hand. The thin gold band Frank had put on her finger 37 years ago. She'd never taken it off, not even after the funeral. Frank died 12 years ago, she said. Heart attack. He was shoveling snow. She laughed bitterly. I told him 1,000 times to let me hire someone. But Frank was stubborn, said he'd been shoveling his own driveway since before I was born. Sounds like a good man. The best man I ever knew. Margaret brought 2 cups of coffee to the living room. We were married for 37 years, built this house together, raised our son here, buried our dog in the backyard. She sat down. Now it's just me. No other family. My sister died in 2015. Frank was an only child. Danny never married. She shrugged. I've got a nephew in California somewhere. We exchange Christmas cards. That's about it. Walt accepted the coffee. So you're alone? I'm alone. He nodded slowly. Me too. My wife passed 15 years ago. Tommy was all I had left. Now, he trailed off. Now you've got the club, Margaret said. She gestured at his jacket draped over a chair. The Hell's Angels. Walt's face changed. Something between pride and defensiveness. People think they know what we are, he said. They see the patch and they think drugs, violence, murder. And yeah, some of that's true. I won't lie to you. There are bad men in the club, just like there are bad men everywhere. Well, but there are good men too. Men who've saved my life more times than I can count. Men who stood by me when my wife died, when Tommy got sick. Walt's voice thickened. When Tommy died, 43 brothers rode with me to the funeral. In the rain. 200 miles. They didn't ask for anything. They just rode. Margaret thought about the church ladies who brought casseroles after Frank died, how they'd stopped coming after a month, how the phone calls had dried up after 6, how by year 2 she'd become invisible. Family doesn't always look the way you expect, she said quietly. No, ma'am, it doesn't. Dawn came slowly. Gray light crept through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving behind snowdrifts and silence. Walt tested his strength, flexing his fingers, moving his legs. I should get going, he said. Get out of your way. Your motorcycle is a mile back with an empty tank, and the plows won't come through for hours. I can call someone, then call them, but you're not walking anywhere. Walt smiled, first real smile she'd seen from him. Has anyone ever won an argument with you? My husband tried for 37 years, never succeeded once. He laughed, actually laughed, and Margaret felt something warm in her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. When was the last time she'd made someone laugh? Walt pulled out a cell phone and dialed. Mike, it's Walt. Yeah, I know. I'm fine. Some lady took me in. No, I'm serious. She saved my life. Just get someone up here with gas. Okay, and bring coffee. Real coffee. I heard that, Margaret called from the kitchen. Walt covered the phone. You were supposed to. An hour later, a pickup truck with Nevada plates pulled into the driveway. The man who stepped out was enormous. 6'4" at least. 300 pounds. Beard to his chest. Arms covered in tattoos. He looked like he could tear a phone book in half without trying. He saw Margaret on the porch and stopped. It's okay, Mike, Walt called. She's the one. The big man approached slowly. He stopped at the bottom of the steps and removed his cap. Ma'am, he said. His voice was soft, respectful. I'm Mike Dawson. I'm president of our chapter in Nevada. Walt here has been with us for 40 years. He's like a father to most of us. He was dying when I found him, Margaret said. I just did what anyone would do. No, ma'am. Mike shook his head. That's not what anyone would do. Most people would have seen the patch and locked their doors. Most people would have let him freeze. He met her eyes. You didn't. Walt came down the steps, moving carefully. He clasped Margaret's hand in both of his. I don't forget kindness, he said. None of us do. You understand what you did tonight, I won't forget. Just get home safe, Margaret said. And next time bring a warmer jacket. Walt laughed again. Then he hugged her. Sudden, fierce. The hug of a man who had accepted death and found himself alive instead. Margaret stiffened at first. When was the last time someone had hugged her all these years? She relaxed into it. Thank you, Walt whispered. Thank you for opening the door. Then he climbed into the truck. Mike nodded to her, too, sir. Once a gesture of respect, she understood perfectly. And they were gone. Margaret stood on the porch until the truck disappeared around the bend. The sun was up now. The snow sparkled like diamonds. She went back inside and looked at her living room. The blankets piled on the couch, the soup pot on the stove. Evidence that last night had actually happened. She should feel good about this. She'd saved a life, done something that mattered. But as she cleaned up, as she washed the dishes, as she returned to the silence, the old weight settled back onto her shoulders. Because tomorrow, the bank would still want their money. Tomorrow, the roof would still leak. Tomorrow, she would still be alone. The letter arrived 3 days later. Margaret saw the bank's logo through the envelope and felt her stomach drop. She'd known it was coming. She'd known for months. But seeing it made it real in a way that nothing else had. Final notice, foreclosure proceedings. $15,000, 30 days. Her hands shook as she read the words. Then she read them again. Then she sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. $15,000. She had $600 in her savings account. Social Security gave her $1,400 a month. After groceries and utilities and medication, she was left with almost nothing. $15,000. She might as well owe $15 million. The phone rang. She ignored it. It rang again and again. Finally, she picked up. Mrs. Thompson, this is Robert Carver from First National Bank. I got your letter. Good. Then you understand the seriousness of the situation. We've been very patient, Mrs. Thompson, but we can't extend any further. I know. Silence. Do you have the money? No. Do you have family who might? No. More silence. Mrs. Thompson, I want to help you. I really do. But my hands are tied. If payment isn't received in 30 days, I know what happens. Is there anything by all? No, Mr. Carver. There isn't anything. Margaret's voice was flat, dead. Thank you for calling. She hung up before he could respond. The next morning, Margaret went to church. Pastor Williams listened to her story with practiced sympathy. He nodded in all the right places, made concerned sounds, promised to pray for her. Our emergency fund is depleted, I'm afraid, he said. The Hendersons needed it for their daughter's surgery. And before that, I understand, Margaret cut in. She stood. Thank you for your time. Margaret, wait, have you tried reaching out to family? Sometimes. I have no family, Pastor, not anymore. She left before he could offer more empty words. That afternoon, she called her nephew Stephen in California. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, maybe 4. She'd lost track. Aunt Maggie? He sounded confused. Is everything okay? No, Stephen, everything is not okay, she explained. The bank, the money, the deadline. Long silence. God, Aunt Maggie, I'm really sorry. I wish I could help. But with the kids' tuition and Sarah's student loans, I understand. Maybe you could sell the house, get an apartment somewhere cheaper. The house isn't worth enough to pay off the debt. Another pause. Well, I'll ask around, see if anyone has any ideas. He wouldn't ask around. They both knew it. Thank you, Stephen. You take care. You too, Aunt Maggie. And hey, let's not wait so long to talk next time, okay? She hung up without answering. Day 5. Margaret tried the church again. Different church this time. I'm sorry, ma'am. Our funds are allocated through the end of the quarter. Day 7. She called a lawyer. Bankruptcy might be an option, but you'd still lose the house. And my retainer is $2,000. Day 9. She asked Eleanor Mitchell 3 houses down. Oh, Maggie, I wish I could, but Harold's been laid off since October. We're barely keeping our heads above water ourselves. Day 11. The roof started leaking again. Margaret put a bucket under the drip and stared at the water falling from her ceiling. Drip, 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 like a countdown to everything falling apart. That night she couldn't sleep. She wandered the house in the dark, touching things. Frank's chair, Danny's high school trophy, the photograph on the mantle of all 3 of them at Danny's 21st birthday. Everyone smiling, everyone alive. What am I supposed to do? She whispered to the empty room. Frank, what am I supposed to do? No answer. There was never an answer. Day 14, halfway to the deadline. Margaret started packing. She began with the easy things. Kitchen items she never used, books she'd never read again, clothes that didn't fit anymore. Then she opened the door to Danny's room. She'd kept it exactly as he'd left it. Posters on the walls, motorcycle magazines on the nightstand, the leather jacket he'd worn every day hanging in the closet. She stood in the doorway for a long time. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered. I'm so sorry. She took one step inside, then another. She picked up his favorite shirt, the blue flannel she'd given him for Christmas the year before he died. She pressed it to her face and breathed in. Nothing. The smell was gone. 5 years, and even that was gone now. The tears came without warning, huge racking sobs that bent her double. She sank to the floor, clutching the shirt, crying for everything she'd lost and everything she was about to lose. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she dried her face, folded the shirt, and put it in a box. Day 18. The temperature dropped to 15 below zero. Margaret woke to a sound like a gunshot. She ran to the spare bedroom and found half the ceiling on the floor. The beam had finally given up. Snow poured through the gap, piling on the bed, the dressers, the carpet. Cold air rushed in like an invading army. Margaret stood there in her nightgown, watching her house die around her. She called a contractor. $8,000 for emergency repairs. I don't have $8,000, she said. I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's what it costs. What if I can't pay? And long pause. Then I'd suggest finding somewhere else to stay. That roof isn't going to hold much longer. She hung up and looked around her kitchen. The kitchen where she'd taught Danny to make pancakes. Where Frank had proposed to her 39 years ago, down on one knee with a ring he'd saved 6 months to buy. 12 days left. No money, no family, no options. Margaret sat down at the table and put her head in her hands. This is it, she thought. This is how it ends. Not with a fight, not with a chance. Just a slow, grinding defeat. She thought about the bottle of sleeping pills in her medicine cabinet. Enough to make the pain stop. Enough to see Frank and Danny again. The thought scared her. The thought comforted her. She pushed it away. Not yet. Not while she could still stand up. Not while she could still breathe. She forced herself to her feet, made coffee, made toast, ate even though she wasn't hungry. That's what she'd done after Frank, after Danny, after every blow life had dealt her. She kept going. Day 19. The phone rang at 6 a.m. Margaret grabbed it, heart pounding. Nobody called this early. Bad news always came early. Hello, static, then nothing. Hello, who is this? Click. She stared at the phone. Wrong number, probably. Or a telemarketer with bad timing. But something about it nagged at her, something she couldn't name. Day 20. She was packing Danny's books when she heard it. A motorcycle. Distant but unmistakable. She went to the window. Nothing. The sound faded. Probably just someone passing through, she told herself. Montana had plenty of bikers even in winter. But her heart beat faster anyway. Day 21. Another call. 6 a.m. again. Hello. Silence. Then a man's voice, rough and low. Is this Margaret Thompson? Yes. Who is this? Pause. A friend. Click. Margaret's hands were shaking as she put the phone down. A friend. What friend? She didn't have friends anymore. She went to the window and looked out at the empty road, the endless snow, the gray sky pressing down like a weight. Something was happening. She just didn't know what. Day 22. Eleanor Mitchell came by with a casserole. You look terrible, Eleanor said bluntly. When's the last time you slept? I don't remember. Maggie. Eleanor set the casserole on the counter. I heard about the roof and the bank. Honey, I'm so sorry. It's fine. It's not fine. None of this is fine. Eleanor took her hand. What are you going to do behind? I don't know. Do you have anywhere to go? No, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. This isn't fair. You're the nicest woman in this town. You've never hurt anyone. This shouldn't be happening to you. Margaret pulled her hand away. Life isn't fair, Eleanor. I learned that a long time ago. But thank you for the casserole. I'll return the dish when I'm done. Eleanor left without another word. Margaret ate the casserole for dinner. It was good, homemade, the kind of meal she used to make for Frank and Danny every Sunday night. She washed the dish and put it by the door to return. 8 days left. Day 23. The call came at 5:47 a.m. Margaret Thompson. Yes, how's your roof holding up? Margaret's blood went cold. Who is this? Someone who pays attention. What do you want? Long pause. Nothing, ma'am, just checking in. Click. Margaret didn't sleep the rest of the night. Day 24. She was standing at the kitchen window, coffee in hand, when she saw him, a man on a motorcycle parked at the end of her driveway, just sitting there, watching. Margaret's cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. By the time she looked up again, he was gone. Day 25. Another motorcycle, different rider this time, same spot at the end of the driveway. Margaret grabbed her coat and marched outside. Hey, she shouted. Who are you? What do you want? The rider looked at her for a long moment. Then he touched 2 fingers to his helmet in a salute and rode away. Margaret stood in the snow, shivering, heart pounding. What the hell was going on? Day 26. The call stopped. The motorcycle stopped. Margaret waited by the window all day, but nothing happened. No one came. The road stayed empty. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe the stress was finally getting to her. Maybe she was losing her mind. 4 days left. She started packing faster. Day 27. Margaret woke to silence. No wind, no creaking, nothing. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to find a reason to get up. She couldn't find one. But she got up anyway. She made coffee. She made toast. She looked at the boxes stacked in the living room, the dismantled pieces of her life waiting to go somewhere she hadn't figured out yet. 3 days. In 3 days, she would be homeless, 68 years old. Widow, childless, broke, homeless. She sat at the kitchen table and put her head down. Frank, she whispered, I could really use a sign right about now. Nothing. Danny, baby, if you can hear me, nothing. And Margaret lifted her head and looked out the window. Just snow, just silence. just the same empty world that had been there all along. Day 28, 2 days left. Margaret spent the morning on the phone with a homeless shelter in Billings. They had a bed available. She could stay for up to 30 days while she figured out her next move. "Thank you," she said. "I'll be there on the 1st." She hung up and looked around her house. The house Frank had built with his own hands. The house where Danny had taken his first steps. The house where she'd spent the happiest years of her life. In 2 days, it wouldn't be hers anymore. She walked through each room slowly, touching walls, opening closets, remembering. The bedroom where Frank had held her every night for 37 years. The bathroom where she'd taught Danny to brush his teeth. The living room where they'd open presents every Christmas morning. The kitchen where someone knocked on the door. Margaret froze. The knock came again, firm, insistent. She walked to the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her hand reached for the knob, turned it, pulled. A man stood on her porch. Old, weathered, familiar. "Hello, Margaret," Walt said. "I told you I wouldn't forget." Behind him, filling the road as far as she could see, were motorcycles. Dozens of them. Their engines roared like thunder. 300 miles away, Big Mike Dawson had stood before his chapter 2 weeks ago. "This woman saved one of ours," he'd said. "She opened her door to a stranger in a storm. She saw the patch and helped him anyway. Now she's about to lose everything." 47 men sat in that room. Mechanics, veterans, fathers, grandfathers, men the world had judged and dismissed. "What do we do?" someone asked. Mike looked at Walt sitting in the front row, the old man who'd ridden with them for 40 years, the old man who'd been a father to all of them. "We do what we always do," Mike said. "We take care of our own." "She's not one of us." "She is now." The vote was unanimous. Boom. Margaret stared at the army of motorcycles in her driveway. 47 machines, 47 riders, leather and chrome and thunder made flesh. "Walt," she breathed. "What is this?" The old man smiled. "This," he said, "is family." Margaret couldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone. Her hands gripped the door frame so hard her knuckles went white. Behind Walt, the roar of 47 motorcycles filled the air like a living thing. "Walt," she managed to say, What is this?" The old man's eyes were bright, alive. Nothing like the dying stranger she dragged off her porch 4 weeks ago. "This is what happens when you save a Hell's Angel," he said. The engines cut off one by one. Silence fell like a blanket. Then the riders began to dismount. Margaret watched them come. Big men, tattooed men, men with beards down to their chests and arms like tree trunks. They formed a line behind Walt, their boots crunching in the snow. Eleanor Mitchell was standing on her porch across the street, phone pressed to her ear. Margaret could see her lips moving. Calling 911 probably. Maybe the National Guard. "Walt, my neighbors are going to have heart attacks." "Let them," he grinned. "We're not here to cause trouble." "Then why are you here?" A massive figure stepped forward. Margaret recognized him immediately. Mike Dawson, the man who'd picked Walt up that morning. "Ma'am," Mike said, removing his cap, "we heard you're in some trouble." "Trouble?" "The bank, the roof, the foreclosure." Margaret's stomach dropped. "How do you know about that?" "Walt told us." Mike gestured at the old man. "He couldn't stop talking about you." "The woman who saved his life. The woman who opened her door when anyone else would have locked it." "So we did some asking around," another rider said. "Younger, maybe 40, scar across his left cheek. Found out you're about to lose your house." "That's none of your—" "It is now," Mike interrupted. "Your family." Margaret blinked. "Excuse me. You saved one of ours. That makes you one of ours." Mike turned to the men behind him. "Doesn't it, brothers?" A chorus of voices. "Damn right." "Hell yeah." "Family." Margaret's head was spinning. She grabbed the door frame tighter. "I don't understand," she said. "I gave Walt some soup and a place to sleep. That's all. Anyone would have done the same." "No, ma'am." The voice came from the back of the group, a woman's voice. Margaret hadn't noticed her before, tall, silver-haired, maybe 60. She pushed through the crowd of men. "Anyone would not have done the same. Trust me, I've been with these idiots for 30 years. I know how people treat them." "This is my wife," Mike said. "Linda." Linda took Margaret's hands in hers. Her grip was strong, warm. Honey, Linda said, do you have any idea what you did that night? I just, you saved a 75-year-old man who was dying in a blizzard. You didn't know him. You didn't know him anything. You saw the patch on his jacket, the patch that makes most people cross the street, and you helped him anyway. Linda squeezed her hands. That's not nothing. That's everything. Margaret felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back. I don't need charity, she said. I've never taken charity in my life. This isn't charity, Walt said. He stepped closer, his voice soft. This is family paying a debt. You don't owe me. I owe you my life. Walt's voice cracked. Do you understand that I was ready to die that night? I'd made peace with it. And then you opened that door and you dragged me inside and you bullied me into staying alive. He laughed wetly. You bullied me, Margaret, a hell's angel, and I'm grateful for it every damn day. Margaret didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, she was completely speechless. A siren wailed in the distance. That'll be the cops, Mike said calmly. Don't worry, we'll handle it. Handle it how? Just watch. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up at the end of the driveway. Deputies stepped out, hands on their weapons. Everyone stay where you are, one of them shouted. Young guy, nervous, probably never seen this many bikers in one place. Mike walked toward them slowly, hands visible. Good morning, officers, he said. Beautiful day, isn't it? Sir, we received reports of a gang gathering. Gang. Mike laughed. We're not a gang, we're a motorcycle club. And we're not gathering, we're helping a neighbor. Helping how? Well, Mike turned and gestured at Margaret's house. See that roof, the one that's caving in? We're going to fix it. The deputy blinked. You're going to fix it. That's right, we've got a licensed contractor. He pointed at a bearded man near the back. 2 electricians. He pointed at 2 more. A plumber, 3 carpenters, and about 40 guys who know how to swing a hammer. We're not here to cause trouble, Walt added, walking him up beside Mike. We're here to help a good woman who did a good thing. The deputies looked at each other. Ma'am, the younger one called to Margaret, do you know these people? Margaret looked at the crowd of bikers, at Walt, who'd almost died on her porch, at Mike, who treated her like family, at Linda, who'd held her hands like they'd known each other for years. Yes, she said, I know them. And you're okay with them being here? Margaret thought about it, really thought about it. 47 strangers had driven hundreds of miles to help her. 47 people who owed her nothing had shown up when no one else would. I'm more than okay with it, she said. The deputies conferred quietly, then the older one shrugged. All right, he said. Just keep it peaceful. Always do, Mike said, unless someone gives us a reason not to. The cruisers pulled away. Eleanor Mitchell was still standing on her porch mouth, hanging open. Mike turned back to the group. All right, brothers, you heard the lady. Let's get to work. The next hour was chaos. Trucks appeared from somewhere, Margaret never figured out where, loaded with lumber, shingles, tools, supplies. The bikers organized themselves with military precision. Teams formed. Assignments were given. Within 30 minutes, men were on her roof, tearing off damaged sections. Margaret stood in her driveway, overwhelmed. You should go inside, Linda said, appearing at her elbow. It's cold out here. I can't just stand inside while they... You can and you will. Linda's voice was firm but kind. These men don't need supervision. What they need is for you to stay warm and let them work. But I should help. You already helped. 4 weeks ago. Linda steered her toward the door. Now it's their turn. Inside, Margaret sat at her kitchen table and watched through the window as her roof was systematically dismantled and rebuilt. She counted the men working 12 on the roof, 8 hauling materials, others scattered around the property, doing things she couldn't identify. The doorbell rang. Margaret opened it to find a young woman holding a casserole dish. Hi, the woman said. I'm Jenny, Mike's daughter. I brought lunch. Lunch for the guys. They're going to be hungry. Jenny pushed past her into the kitchen. And I brought extra for you. You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in weeks. So, don't argue. Mom told me about you. Jenny started pulling containers from a bag. She said you're stubborn as hell and twice as proud. Well, so am I, so sit down and eat. Margaret sat. Jenny piled a plate high with food meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans a roll, and set it in front of her. Eat, she commanded. Margaret ate. It was the best meal she'd had in months, maybe years. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite hit her tongue. Good, Jenny asked. Amazing. Mom's recipe. She's been making it for club gatherings since before I was born. Jenny sat down across from her. So, Walt says you were a nurse for 41 years. That's incredible. I wanted to be a nurse when I was younger. Ended up becoming a teacher instead. What do you teach? Third grade. Little monsters, every one of them. I love it. They talked about teaching, about nursing, about the challenges of working with people who didn't always want to be helped. It was easy, natural, like they'd known each other for years. Margaret realized with a start that she was enjoying herself. When was the last time that had happened? A knock on the window made them both look up. Mike was standing outside, gesturing for Margaret to come out. She grabbed her coat and stepped onto the porch. What is it? Come look at something. He led her around to the side of the house where a group of men had gathered around a section of the foundation. See this? Mike pointed at a crack running up the concrete. This is why your pipes keep freezing. You've got water getting in here, expanding. When it freezes, it's making the crack bigger every year. I didn't know that was there. Most people don't. It's hidden behind the bushes. Mike looked at her. We can fix it. Properly. It'll take an extra day, but it'll save you thousands in repairs down the line. I can't ask you to... You're not asking, I'm telling. He smiled. Consider it a bonus. Margaret looked at the crack, at the men standing around it, at the work happening all around her house. Why? She asked quietly. Mike's smile faded. Why what? Why all of this? I saved one man's life. One night, that's all. This... She gestured at everything. This is too much. Mike was quiet for the moment. Then he sat down on a pile of lumber and patted the space beside him. Margaret sat. Let me tell you something about Walt, Mike said. That man joined the club when he was 32 years old. He was angry back then, lost. His first wife had just left him, took his daughter with her. He didn't know who he was anymore. I didn't know he had a daughter. He doesn't talk about her. They haven't spoken in 20 years. Mike shook his head. Anyway, Walt found the club and the club saved him. Gave him a family when his real family fell apart. He met his second wife through us. Had Tommy. His voice softened. When his wife died, we were there. When Tommy got sick, we were there. When Tommy died, you rode with him to the funeral, Margaret finished. 43 of us in the rain. Mike looked at her. Walt has given everything to this club. His time, his money, his heart. He's been a father to half the guys here, a grandfather to their kids. He paused. And 4 weeks ago, he almost died alone on a frozen road because he's too stubborn to admit he's getting old. Sounds familiar, Margaret muttered. Mike laughed. Yeah, I bet it does. He sobered. The point is, when Walt called and told us what you did, taking him in, saving his life, treating him like a human being instead of a monster, something shifted. For all of us. I don't understand. We're used to being hated, Mike said simply. We're used to people crossing the street when they see us, locking their doors, calling the cops. We're used to being treated like criminals even when we haven't done anything wrong. He met her eyes. But you looked at a dying man wearing a Hell's Angels patch, and you saw a person. You saw someone worth saving. Margaret didn't know what to say. That means something, Mike continued. That means everything. Because if you can see the good in us, maybe we're not as far gone as everyone thinks. You're not far gone at all, Margaret said softly. You're just people, same as everyone else. Mike smiled. Not everyone sees it that way. Then everyone is wrong. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the men work. Tell me about your son, Mike said finally. Margaret stiffened. What? Walt told me about Danny, the motorcycle accident. Mike's voice was gentle. I lost a brother that way, 15 years ago. Hit-and-run driver. I'm sorry. Me too, he paused. Does it ever get easier? Margaret thought about it, really thought about it. No, she said honestly. It doesn't get easier. You just learn to carry it better. Mike nodded slowly. That's what I figured. A shout came from the roof. One of the workers was waving his arms. Looks like they need me, Mike said, standing. But Margaret, I want you to know something. What? You're not alone anymore. Whatever happens after today, you've got family now, real family. He squeezed her shoulder. Don't forget that. He walked away before she could respond. Margaret sat on the pile of lumber, watching men she didn't know repair the home she'd thought she was losing. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't feel alone. The sun set. The work continued. Floodlights appeared from somewhere, illuminating the house like a construction site. The sound of hammers and drills filled the air until well past midnight. Margaret tried to stay awake to watch, to bear witness to this impossible thing happening to her. But exhaustion won. She fell asleep on the couch around 1 a.m., and when she woke, it was morning, and her roof was finished. She stood on the porch, staring up at it. New shingles, new flashing, new gutters. It looked better than it had in 20 years. What do you think? Walt was standing beside her, coffee cup in hand. I think I'm dreaming, Margaret said. You're not. This can't be real. It is. She turned to him. Walt, I don't know how to thank you. I don't know how to thank any of you. You already did, he said, 4 weeks ago, and the other bikers were gathering in the driveway, stretching, drinking coffee, preparing to leave. Some of them nodded at Margaret as they passed. Others stopped to shake her hand to wish her well. Mike approached with a small wooden box. Before we go, he said, there's one more thing. More, Mike, you've already done too well. Just open it. Margaret took the box, opened it. Inside was a check. She looked at the number, looked again. $25,000. No, she breathed. No, I can't accept this. You can and you will. This is too much. It's not enough. Mike's voice was firm. That money came from every chapter on the West Coast. Brothers who never met you but heard your story. Brothers who wanted to help. He closed her hands around the box. Pay off the bank. Fix whatever else needs fixing. And if there's anything left over, do something nice for yourself. You've earned it. Margaret was crying now. She couldn't stop. I don't deserve this, she whispered. Yes, you do. Linda appeared beside her husband. You deserve this and more. You just forgot for a while. The bikers began mounting their motorcycles. Engines roared to life. Walt pulled Margaret into a hug. I'm going to visit, he said, every few months. Make sure you're okay. You don't have to. I want to. He pulled back, holding her shoulders. You're family now, Margaret, and family takes care of each other. One by one, the motorcycles pulled out of her driveway, 47 engines thundering in unison. The neighbors came out of their houses to watch, mouths hanging open. Margaret stood on her porch, the box clutched to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Linda was the last to leave. She hugged Margaret tight. If you ever need anything, she said, anything at all, you call. Understand. I understand. Good. Linda climbed onto the back of Mike's bike. Take care of yourself, Margaret. We'll be watching. The last motorcycle disappeared around the bend. Silence fell. Margaret stood alone on her porch, looking at the empty road. Her roof was fixed. Her bank debt was about to be paid. Her future, which had seemed so dark just yesterday, was suddenly filled with light. She looked down at the check in her hands. $25,000. From strangers, from outcasts, from the people the world had taught her to fear. Frank, she whispered to the empty air, you won't believe what just happened. No answer, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel quite so heavy. Margaret went inside, sat down at her kitchen table, and began to plan her new life. She was halfway through her second cup of coffee when the phone rang. Hello, Mrs. Thompson. This is Robert Carver from First National Bank. Margaret smiled. Mr. Carver, she said. I was just about to call you. You were, yes, I have some good news. She could hear the surprise in his voice. Good news. I'll be coming in tomorrow to pay off my loan, in full. Silence. In full. Every penny. Mrs. Thompson, that's wonderful news. May I ask how? No, Margaret said pleasantly. You may not. I'll see you tomorrow, Mr. Carver. Have a nice day. She hung up before he could respond. Then she laughed. For the first time in 5 years, Margaret Thompson laughed until her sides hurt. She was still laughing when Eleanor Mitchell knocked on her door 20 minutes later. Maggie, Eleanor's face was pale, shocked. What just happened? Who were those people? Margaret opened the door wider. Come in, Eleanor. I'll make us some tea. But it's a long story, Margaret smiled, and I think you're going to want to sit down for it. Eleanor came in. Margaret put the kettle on. And then she told her neighbor everything. About the storm, about Walt, about the night she'd opened her door to a dying stranger and changed both their lives forever. When she finished, Eleanor was crying. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, Eleanor whispered. It's just kindness, Margaret said. That's all it ever was. Just kindness coming back around. Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For not helping more, for not being there when you needed it. Margaret squeezed her hand. You were there, Eleanor. You brought me casseroles. You checked on me. You cared. She smiled. That matters more than you know. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking their tea. So what now? Eleanor finally asked. Margaret looked around her kitchen. At the walls that had held her family's memories for 40 years. At the window Frank used to stand at every morning. At the floor Danny used to run across as a child. Now, she said slowly, I start living again. Eleanor smiled. Good, it's about time. That night Margaret went to Danny's room. The boxes were still there, half packed, waiting. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she began unpacking. She put his shirts back in the dresser, his books back on the shelf, his motorcycle magazines back on the nightstand. She hung his leather jacket in the closet right where it belonged. I'm not giving up on you, baby, she whispered to the empty room. I'm never giving up on you. She closed the door gently and went to bed. For the first time in months, she slept through the night. She dreamed of motorcycles. But this time they weren't strangers. They were family. 3 weeks passed. Margaret woke each morning still expecting to find the old leaking roof, the cold drafts, the crushing weight of debt. Instead, she found a house that felt new, a bank account with money in it, a refrigerator full of food that Linda had insisted on stocking before the club left. But more than that, she found purpose. It started with a phone call. Margaret, it's Walt. She smiled at the sound of his voice. They'd talked twice since he left once to make sure she'd paid off the bank once just to chat. She was starting to look forward to his calls. How are you feeling? She asked. Better than I have in years. Doctor says my lungs are clear, no lasting damage from the hypothermia. Good, you scared me half to death that night. Scared myself too. He paused. Listen, I'm calling because I need to ask you something. Anything. One of our brother's guy named Eddie Vasquez, his mother is sick. Real sick. She's 82, lives alone in Reno. Eddie's trying to take care of her, but he's got 3 kids and a mom, and he's stretched thin. Margaret's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. What kind of sick? COPD, congestive heart failure. The doctors say she needs round-the-clock monitoring, but she refuses to go to a nursing home. Can't blame her for that. No, Walt took a breath. I know this is a lot to ask, and you can say no. But Eddie's desperate. He doesn't know what to do. And when I told him about you, about what you did for me, he asked if maybe I could help. You don't have to. I know you've been through a lot. Margaret thought about it. She thought about the 47 strangers who had driven hundreds of miles to save her house. She thought about the check in the wooden box. She thought about Mike's words, family takes care of each other. Give me Eddie's number, she said. She drove to Reno the next day. Rosa Vasquez was exactly what Margaret expected, a tiny, fierce woman with silver hair and eyes that still held fire despite her failing body. She sat in a recliner with an oxygen tank beside her, glaring at Margaret like she was an invading army. I don't need a nurse, Rosa snapped. Good, because I'm not here to be your nurse. Rosa blinked. Then why are you here? Because your son is worried sick about you, because you're too stubborn to accept help, and because I know exactly how that feels. Margaret sat down across from her. I'm Margaret. I'm 68 years old. I was a nurse for 41 years. My husband died of a heart attack because he was too stubborn to stop shoveling snow. My son died in a motorcycle accident because he was too stubborn to wear a helmet. Rosa's expression shifted just slightly. So trust me when I say I understand stubborn, Margaret continued. I also understand pride, and I understand not wanting to be a burden. But here's the thing, Rosa, your son loves you, and watching you suffer alone is killing him. I'm not suffering. You're lying. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. I can hear it in your breathing. I can see it in the way you're holding yourself. You're in pain right now, aren't you? Rosa said nothing, but her jaw tightened. Let me help you, Margaret said. Not because you need it, because your son needs it, because he needs to know his mother is okay so he can focus on his kids and his life. I don't want to be a burden, Rosa whispered. You're not a burden. You're a mother. There's a difference about you. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She looked away quickly, trying to hide them. My husband used to say that, she said quietly, before he died. Sounds like a smart man. He was. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she looked back at Margaret. How long what? How long are you willing to stay? Margaret smiled. As long as you need me. She stayed for 2 weeks. She monitored Rosa's medications, adjusted her oxygen levels, taught her breathing exercises that made the bad days more bearable. She cooked meals that Rosa actually ate, which Eddie said was a miracle in itself. But more than that, she talked to her. They talked about husbands they'd lost and children they'd raised. They talked about the old days when women were expected to be quiet and obedient, and neither of them had ever managed it. They talked about fear and faith and what it meant to grow old in a world that had no use for old women. You're not what I expected, Rosa said one evening. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone who would treat me like a patient, like I was already dying. You're not dying, Margaret said. You're living. There's a difference. Rosa smiled. First real smile Margaret had seen from her. I like you, Margaret Thompson. I like you too, Rosa Vasquez. When Eddie came to pick up his mother for a doctor's appointment, he found the two women playing cards and arguing about politics. Mom, he said, stunned, you're out of bed. Of course I'm out of bed. Margaret says sitting around feeling sorry for myself is bad for my lungs. Rosa waved a hand. She's very bossy. Takes one to know one, Margaret shot back. Eddie looked between them, tears forming in his eyes. I don't know how to thank you, he said to Margaret. You don't have to. This is what family does. But we're not. Yes, we are. Margaret stood and put a hand on his shoulder. Your club saved my life. The least I can do is return the favor. Eddie hugged her, hard, the kind of hug that said more than words ever could. The word spread. Margaret didn't know how, but within a month, her phone was ringing constantly. Hell's Angel members from Nevada, California, Arizona. All of them had elderly parents who needed help. Parents who were too proud to accept outside care, but who might listen to the woman who saved Walt. You've become a legend, Linda told her during one of their now weekly phone calls. The guys are calling you Angel Mom. That's ridiculous. That's respect. Margaret helped where she could. She drove to Sacramento to teach a diabetic grandmother how to manage her insulin. She flew to Phoenix to help a stroke survivor with his physical therapy exercises. She spent a week in Tucson with a Vietnam veteran who hadn't left his house in 3 years because he was afraid of falling. Each time she found the same thing, stubborn old people who had been abandoned by a world that had no use for them anymore. People who reminded her of herself. You're doing God's work, Pastor Williams told her when she mentioned it at church. I'm just doing what I know how to do, Margaret replied, taking care of people who need it. That's the same thing. Maybe it was. 3 months after the bikers had rebuilt her roof, Margaret got another call from Walt. I need to tell you something, he said. His voice was strange, tight. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, it's just, there's something I haven't been honest about. Margaret's stomach tightened. What do you mean? Remember when I told you about my son Tommy, how he died of cancer? Of course. I didn't tell you everything. Walt took a shaky breath. I didn't tell you about my daughter. Margaret waited. Her name is Sarah. She's 53 now, lives in Portland. Walt's voice cracked. I haven't spoken to her in 20 years. What happened? I happened. He laughed bitterly. When her mother left me, Sarah was 12. She wanted to stay with me, but her mother, my ex, she poisoned her against me. Told her I was dangerous, that the club was full of criminals, that I would ruin her life if she stayed. Did you fight for custody? I tried, but back then courts didn't give fathers much of a chance, especially fathers with Hell's Angels on their jacket. He paused. I was so angry, Margaret. So angry at her mother, at the system, at the whole damn world. And somewhere along the way, I let that anger turn into distance. I stopped calling, stopped writing, told myself she was better off without me. Walt, 20 years, Margaret. 20 years I've been telling myself that lie. His voice broke completely. And now I'm 75 years old and I almost died in a snowstorm, and the only thing I could think about was that I was going to die without ever telling my daughter I love her. Margaret felt tears on her own cheeks. Have you tried to contact her? I don't know how. I don't even know if she wants to hear from me. There's only one way to find out. Silence. I'm scared, Walt admitted. I've faced down men twice my size. I've ridden through hurricanes. I've buried my son and my wife. But this terrifies me. That's how you know it matters. More silence. Will you help me? Walt asked quietly. I don't know how to do this alone. You're not alone, Margaret said. You have family now, remember? She flew to Nevada the next week. Finding Sarah wasn't hard. The internet made everything easy these days. Sarah Martinez née Brennan, married, 2 kids, a boy in college, a girl in high school. She worked as a nurse at Providence Portland Medical Center. A nurse, just like Margaret. She became a nurse, Walt said, staring at the Facebook profile on Margaret's laptop. I didn't know that. You couldn't have known. You weren't there. I should have been there. Yes, you should have. Margaret closed the laptop. But you can't change the past, Walt. You can only change what happens next. What if she hates me? Then she hates you and you'll have to live with that. Margaret took his hand. But what if she doesn't? What if she's been waiting 20 years for her father to come back? Walt's eyes glistened. You really think that's possible? I think the only way to find out is to try. They wrote the letter together. It took 4 hours and 17 drafts. Walt wanted to explain everything, the anger, the distance, the regret. Margaret kept pushing him to simplify, to focus on what mattered. She doesn't need your excuses, Margaret said. She needs to know you love her. The final letter was 2 pages. It said everything and nothing. It said, I'm sorry. It said, I miss you. It said, I understand if you never want to see me again, but I needed you to know that not a day has passed when I haven't thought about you. Walt mailed it the next morning. Now what? He asked. Now we wait. The waiting was the hardest part. Days passed, then a week, then 2. Walt called Margaret every day, sometimes twice. She could hear the hope in his voice slowly dying, replaced by resignation. She's not going to write back, he said finally. I don't blame her. Give it time. It's been 2 weeks. Give it more time. 3 days later, Walt called again. His voice was different this time, shaking. Margaret, what is it? She wrote back. Margaret's heart leaped. What did she say? I don't know. I can't open it. His voice cracked. I'm too scared. Walt, I know it's stupid. I know I'm a grown man, but I can't do it. I can't. Then I'll come to you. She was in Nevada by evening. Walt was sitting at his kitchen table, the unopened envelope in front of him. He looked older than she'd ever seen him. Smaller somehow. Margaret sat down across from him. Do you want me to read it? He shook his head. I need to do it myself. I need you here. I'm here. Walt stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then he picked it up, slid his finger under the flap, and pulled out the letter. He read it silently. Margaret watched his face. She saw surprise, confusion, then something that looked like pain, then something that looked like hope, then tears. Walt, he couldn't speak. He just handed her the letter. Dear Dad, it began. Margaret read the whole thing, 3 pages handwritten. 20 years of hurt and anger and confusion poured out in blue ink on white paper. But at the end, at the very end, 4 words that changed everything. I want to see you. She wants to see me, Walt whispered. After everything I did, after 20 years of silence, she wants to see me. She's your daughter, Margaret said. Of course she wants to see you. How do you know? Because I'm a mother. Margaret handed the letter back. And there's nothing a child wants more than their parents' love. Not ever, not even when it hurts. Walt clutched the letter to his chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. Will you come with me, Juan? He asked. When I go to see her. Walt, that's a family moment. I shouldn't. You are family. He reached across the table and took her hand. Margaret, I would have died in that snowstorm if you hadn't opened your door. I would have died alone without ever making things right with my daughter. You gave me a second chance. You gave me this. Margaret squeezed his hand. Then yes, she said, I'll come with you. They drove to Portland 3 weeks later. Walt was quiet the whole way, 9 hours of near silence, broken only by occasional requests to stop for coffee or bathroom breaks. Margaret didn't push him. She knew what he was feeling. The terror of hope. The fear that it would all fall apart at the last minute. They arrived at Sarah's house just after noon. It was a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. Flowers in the garden, a swing set in the backyard. Evidence of a life well lived. Walt sat in the car staring at the front door. I can't move, he said. Yes, you can. What if I say the wrong thing? You will. That's guaranteed. Margaret put a hand on his arm. But you're still going to go up there and ring that doorbell because you've waited 20 years for this moment and you're not going to let fear steal it from you. Walt took a deep breath, then another. Then he opened the car door and stepped out. Margaret watched him walk up the path. Slow steps, hesitant, every inch of his body screaming that he wanted to turn and run. He reached the door. He raised his hand. He knocked. The door opened. And there she was, Sarah, 53 years old, gray at her temples, lines around her eyes. But Margaret could see Walt in her face, the same stubborn jaw, the same fierce eyes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Sarah said one word, Daddy, and Walt broke. 20 years of walls came crashing down. He fell into his daughter's arms, sobbing like a child, repeating her name over and over. Sarah held him, crying just as hard, her hands gripping his jacket like she was afraid he would disappear. Margaret watched from the car, tears streaming down her own face. She thought about Danny, about all the things she never got to say to him, about the hugs that would never happen, the conversations that would never be had. But this watching Walt reunite with his daughter, this was something. This was a second chance that she had helped create. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Eventually, Sarah looked up and saw Margaret watching. She wiped her eyes and gestured for Margaret to come. Margaret hesitated. Come on, Sarah called. Dad's told me all about you. Margaret walked up to the house on unsteady legs. Sarah released her father and pulled Margaret into a hug. Thank you, Sarah whispered. Thank you for saving his life. Thank you for bringing him back to me. I just opened a door, Margaret said. He did the rest. No. Sarah pulled back, looking at her with Walt's eyes. You did more than that. You reminded him that he still had something to live for. They went inside. They talked for hours. Sarah's husband came home, then her children. Margaret watched Walt meet his grandchildren for the first time, two teenagers who looked at him with curiosity and cautious hope. Are you really in a motorcycle gang? The boy asked. It's a club, Walt corrected. And yes, I am. That's kind of cool. Walt smiled. Yeah, I think so too. That night after dinner, Sarah walked Margaret to the car. I don't know how to thank you, Sarah said. You don't have to. But I want to. Sarah took her hands. Dad told me what you've been doing, helping people in the club, taking care of their parents. He said you've become like a mother to all of them. I'm just doing what I know how to do. That's not true. Sarah's eyes were serious. You're healing people, Margaret. Not just their bodies, their families, their relationships, their lives. She squeezed Margaret's hands. That's a gift. Don't ever forget that. Margaret drove back to Montana the next day. Walt stayed in Portland for another week, making up for lost time with his daughter and grandchildren. He called Margaret every night, his voice lighter than she'd ever heard it. Thank you, he said on the last night, for everything. Stop thanking me. Never, he laughed. You're stuck with my gratitude forever. Deal with it, Margaret smiled. Fine, I'll deal with it. Good, now get some sleep. I'll be back in Montana next month. We're going to visit Tommy's grave together. I'd like that. Me too. She hung up and sat in her quiet kitchen, looking around at the house that had almost been taken from her. The house that was now filled with memories, not just old ones, but new ones too. Phone calls from Linda, visits from bikers passing through, letters from Rosa and Eddie and all the others she'd helped. Family, she thought. I have family again. The phone rang. Margaret picked it up, expecting Walt. Hello, Mrs. Thompson. A woman's voice, official sounding. Yes, this is Karen Wright from the Montana Senior Services Association. I'm calling because your name came up in a very interesting conversation today. What kind of conversation, Sashito? We've heard about the work you've been doing with elderly patients across the West Coast. The home visits, the family counseling, the care coordination. Margaret frowned. How did you hear about that? A woman named Linda Dawson contacted us. She said you have been doing incredible work and she thought we should know about it. Linda, of course. What exactly can I do for you, Ms. Wright? Actually, Mrs. Thompson, the question is what we can do for you. Karen's voice warmed. We'd like to offer you a position, a paid position helping us coordinate care for elderly patients across rural Montana. Margaret sat down slowly. You're offering me a job. We're offering you a chance to do what you've already been doing, but with resources, support, and a salary. Karen paused. Mrs. Thompson, what you've been doing on your own is remarkable. Imagine what you could do with our help. Margaret thought about it. She thought about the past 3 months, about Rosa and Eddie, about Walt and Sarah, about all the lonely old people out there who just needed someone to care. When do I start? She asked. Karen laughed. I was hoping you'd say that. Margaret started her new job on a Monday in April. Karen Wright wasn't kidding about the resources. Within 2 weeks, Margaret had an office, a company car, and a caseload of 37 elderly patients scattered across rural Montana. Most of them lived alone. Most of them had been forgotten by everyone except the government agencies that sent their checks. Margaret remembered what that felt like. She threw herself into the work with an energy she hadn't felt in years. She drove hundreds of miles each week, visiting patients in their homes, coordinating their care, connecting them with services they didn't know existed. She bullied doctors into returning phone calls. She fought insurance companies until they approved necessary treatments. She did whatever it took. You're a force of nature, Karen told her after Margaret's first month. I've never seen anyone work like this. I'm just doing my job. You're doing 3 jobs, and you're doing them better than anyone I've ever hired. The Hells Angels stayed in touch. Linda called every Sunday. Walt visited every few weeks, always bringing food or flowers or some small gift he insisted she accept. Mike and his crew showed up in June to help her plant a garden, 20 bikers on their hands and knees, digging in the dirt, arguing about the proper way to grow tomatoes. This is ridiculous, Margaret said, watching them work. This is family, Mike replied. Get used to it. She was getting used to it. That was the strangest part. After 5 years of isolation, she was surrounded by people who cared about her. People who called just to check in. People who showed up unannounced with casseroles and company. For the first time since Danny died, Margaret felt like she belonged somewhere. Then August came. The call arrived at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Margaret fumbled for her phone in the darkness, her heart already pounding. Nothing good ever came from 3 a.m. phone calls. Hello. Margaret, it was Linda's voice, but wrong, shaking. Something's happened. Margaret sat up immediately. What is it? It's Walt. Linda's voice broke. He's in the hospital. They don't know if he's going to make it. The world tilted sideways. What happened? Heart attack, massive. He was riding back from Portland. He'd been visiting Sarah and the grandkids, and he just collapsed right off his bike. Another rider found him on the side of the road. Margaret was already out of bed, searching for clothes in the dark. Where is he? Billings, St. Vincent Healthcare. I'm on my way. She drove through the night, pushing her car faster than she should have, not caring about speed limits or safety or anything except getting to Walt. 4 hours of darkness and fear, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. He'd been fine. He'd been healthy. The doctors had cleared him after the hypothermia. How could this happen? She arrived at the hospital just as the sun was coming up. Linda met her in the waiting room. The big woman looked smaller somehow, her face pale and drawn. She grabbed Margaret in a fierce hug. Thank God you're here. How is he? Still in surgery. They've been working on him for 6 hours. Linda pulled back, wiping her eyes. It was bad, Margaret. Really bad. The doctor said if that other rider hadn't found him when he did, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Margaret sat down heavily. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Who else knows? Everyone. Mike's on his way with about 30 brothers. Sarah's flying in from Portland. Linda sat beside her. The whole club is mobilizing. Walt's been with us for 40 years. He's family. He's my family too, Margaret whispered. Linda took her hand. I know, honey. I know. They waited. An hour passed, then 2, then 3. Margaret paced. She couldn't sit still. She couldn't eat the food Linda brought her. She couldn't do anything except wait and pray and try not to think about what would happen if Walt didn't make it. She'd lost Frank. She'd lost Danny. She couldn't lose Walt too. Not now, not when she'd finally found hope again. The surgeon appeared at noon. Margaret jumped to her feet. Linda grabbed her arm. Family of Walter Brennan. Yes, they said together. The surgeon looked exhausted. His scrubs were stained, his eyes were bloodshot, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. He made it through surgery. Margaret's knees buckled. Linda caught her. He's not out of the woods yet, the surgeon continued quickly. The next 48 hours are critical. He's in the ICU and we're monitoring him closely. But he's a fighter. I've never seen anyone survive a heart attack that severe. Can we see him? Margaret asked. Family only for now. She is family, Linda said firmly. She's the reason he's alive. The surgeon looked between them, then nodded. 5 minutes, no more. They followed him through the maze of hospital corridors to the ICU. Margaret knew these hallways. She'd spent 41 years in places like this, but walking them as a visitor, as someone with a loved one in critical condition, was completely different. Walt looked small in the hospital bed. That was Margaret's first thought. This big, fierce man who'd survived blizzards and bar fights, and 4 decades on a motorcycle, he looked like a child lost in white sheets and beeping machines. She took his hand. It was cold. Hey, old man, she whispered. You scared the hell out of me. No response, just the steady beep of the heart monitor. You don't get to die on me, you hear. You've got grandchildren to spoil. You've got Sarah to make up with. You've got years of annoying me left to do. Her voice cracked. So you fight Walt. You fight like hell. His fingers twitched in her hand. Margaret's heart leaped. Walt, can you hear me? Another twitch, stronger this time. That's right, keep fighting. I'm right here, I'm not going anywhere. She stayed until the nurses made her leave. The next 2 days were the longest of Margaret's life. She barely slept, she barely ate. She spent every moment she was allowed at Walt's bedside talking to him, reading to him, doing anything she could think of to keep him tethered to this world. Mike arrived with a convoy of Hell's Angels. They took over the waiting room, their presence both comforting and terrifying to the hospital staff. But they were quiet, respectful, and fiercely protective of anyone who tried to disturb them. How's he doing? Mike asked Margaret on the second night. Holding on, that's all they'll tell me. That's enough. Mike put a hand on her shoulder. Walt's the toughest son of a bitch I've ever known. He's not going to let a heart attack take him out. I hope you're right. I'm always right. Ask anyone. Margaret almost smiled. Almost. Sarah arrived the next morning red-eyed and frantic. Where is he? Is he okay? Can I see him? Margaret caught her before she could run into the ICU. He's stable. That's the good news. But he's still unconscious, and the doctors want to keep him that way for a little longer while his heart heals. I need to see him. I know. Come with me. She led Sarah to Walt's room, staying in the doorway while the daughter sat beside her father. Margaret watched Sarah take Walt's hand. Watched her whisper words, too quiet to hear. Watched her cry the tears of a little girl who thought she'd lost her daddy all over again. Thank you, Sarah said when she finally emerged. For being here, for taking care of him. I told you, he's family. I know, but still. Sarah hugged her tightly. I don't know what any of us would do without you. On the third day, Walt opened his eyes. Margaret was alone with him when it happened. She'd been reading aloud from a motorcycle magazine she'd found in the waiting room, something about custom paint jobs and engine modifications that she didn't understand at all. You're reading that wrong. Margaret's head snapped up. Walt was looking at her. His eyes were cloudy, unfocused, but open. Walt, she grabbed his hand. You're awake. Unfortunately, his voice was barely a whisper. Everything hurts. That's because you almost died, you stubborn old fool. The tears were streaming down her face. What were you thinking riding alone at your age? Same thing I was thinking. 40 years ago. He tried to smile. That I'm invincible. You're not invincible. You're an idiot. Same thing. Margaret laughed through her tears. She couldn't help it. Even on death's door, Walt was still making jokes. Sarah's here, she said. She's been worried sick. Walt's expression shifted. Something soft, something vulnerable. She came. Of course she came. She loves you. I love her too. His eyes glistened. Tell her I'm sorry for scaring her. Tell her yourself. She'll be back in 5 minutes. The reunion between father and daughter was everything Margaret had hoped for. She stepped outside to give them privacy, but she could hear Sarah crying through the door. Happy tears this time. Relief and joy and all the emotions that came with almost losing someone and getting them back. Mike found her in the hallway. He's awake. He's awake and already being difficult. Mike laughed. That's Walt. Wouldn't know how to be easy if his life depended on it. He sobered. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. I didn't do anything. You did everything. You've been here every second. You've kept Sarah calm. You've kept the rest of us from losing our minds. He met her eyes. You're the heart of this family now. Whether you like it or not. Margaret didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. The recovery was slow. Walt spent 2 weeks in the hospital, then another month in a rehabilitation center. Margaret visited every day often, bringing work with her so she could sit beside him while coordinating care for her other patients. You should be resting, she told him one afternoon. You should be minding your own business. Your business is my business now. Get used to it. Walt grunted, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. He was moved to a regular room after 3 weeks. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The damage to his heart was significant but not irreversible. With medication, lifestyle changes, and careful monitoring, he could live for many more years. No more long rides, the cardiologist said firmly. Walt's face fell. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. The exertion, the stress on your heart, it's too risky. Doc, I've been riding for 50 years. And if you want to see 51, you'll stop. Margaret watched the fight drain out of Walt. She'd never seen him look so defeated. Later, when they were alone, she took his hand. I know what you're thinking, she said. Do you, Tom? You're thinking that riding is who you are, that without it, you're nothing. She squeezed his hand. You're wrong. Walt, you're not just a biker. You're a father, a grandfather, a brother to 50 men who would die for you. She paused. And you're my friend, the best friend I've had in years. His eyes softened. Margaret, you don't need a motorcycle to matter. You matter because of who you are, not what you ride. Walt was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, he said, okay, what? Okay, I'll stop riding on one condition. What condition? You have to visit me more often. I'm going to be bored out of my mind without the road. Margaret smiled. I think I can manage that. They released Walt in September. Margaret drove him home herself, refusing to let anyone else do it. They made the trip, slowly stopping often so Walt could stretch his legs and take his medication. This is humiliating, he grumbled at one rest stop. This is being alive. Stop complaining. I'm 75 years old. Complaining is my constitutional right. She got him settled in his apartment in Nevada, made sure his refrigerator was stocked and his medication schedule was posted where he could see it. Linda promised to check on him daily. Sarah was already planning to visit again next month. You're fussing, Walt said as Margaret straightened his blankets. I'm being thorough. You're being a mother hen. Someone has to be. She stepped back and looked at him. Call me if you need anything at all. I will. I mean it, Walt. Don't be stubborn about this. I promise. He caught her hand before she could turn away. Margaret. What? Thank you for everything. His voice was rough. I know I say that a lot, but I mean it. You saved my life twice now. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You already have. She bent down and kissed his forehead. Take care of yourself, old man. You too, Angel Mom. She drove back to Montana with a strange mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and something that felt almost like peace. October brought changes. Margaret's work with the Senior Services Association expanded. She was promoted to regional coordinator, overseeing a team of 15 care workers across 4 counties. The job was demanding, but she loved it. She also started something new. It began with a phone call from a woman in Missoula whose father had just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The woman was panicked, overwhelmed, drowning in information she couldn't process. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "I don't know how to help him." Margaret spent 2 hours on the phone with her, explaining the disease, outlining care options, connecting her with support groups and resources. By the end of the call, the woman was calmer, more hopeful. "How do you know all this?" she asked. 41 years of experience, Margaret replied, and a lot of stubborn patients who taught me more than any textbook ever could. "You should teach other people. Seriously, this information saved my life today." The idea stuck. Margaret started a workshop at the local community center for families dealing with aging parents. She expected maybe 10 people. 30 showed up, then 50 at the next one, then 100. "You're a natural," Karen said after observing one of Margaret's sessions. "Have you ever thought about doing this full-time?" "I thought I was doing this full-time." "I mean the teaching part, the education. You have a gift for making complicated things simple." Margaret thought about it. She thought about all the families she'd helped, all the confusion and fear she'd seen in their eyes. She thought about how much easier things might have been for her if someone had guided her through Frank's illness, through Danny's death. "Maybe," she said. "Let me think about it." But she already knew the answer. Christmas came fast that year. Margaret hadn't celebrated properly since Danny died. She usually spent the day alone watching old movies and trying not to think about the past. But this year was different. Linda called the week before. "We're having a gathering at the clubhouse. You're coming." "Linda, I don't think." "I wasn't asking." Margaret found herself in Nevada on Christmas Eve surrounded by 50 Hells Angels and their families. There was food everywhere, turkey ham, every side dish imaginable. Children ran through the clubhouse screaming with excitement. Adults laughed and argued and told stories that got more outrageous with every telling. Walt was there, of course. Thinner than before, moving slower but alive. So wonderfully alive. "Merry Christmas, Angel Mom," he said, pulling her into a hug. "Merry Christmas, old man. How are you feeling?" "Like I've been given a second chance." He pulled back, his eyes bright. "Actually, make that a third chance. First you saved me from the snowstorm. Then you saved my relationship with Sarah. Now," he gestured at the room full of people, "now I get to spend Christmas with my family. All of my family." Sarah was there with her husband and children. The grandkids were already calling Margaret Aunt Maggie, a development that made her tear up every time she heard it. "Speech," someone shouted. Mike stood up, raising his glass. All right, settle down." He waited for the noise to die. "I want to say a few words about someone special, someone who came into our lives a year ago and changed everything." Margaret felt her face flush. "Most of you know the story. Walt was dying in a snowstorm. A stranger opened her door and saved his life. But what happened after that, what Margaret Thompson has done for this club, for our families, for all of us, that's something none of us expected." He turned to look at her. "Margaret, you taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about caring for people even when they're difficult. It's about opening your door to a stranger in a storm." He raised his glass higher. "To Angel Mom, the heart of this family." 50 voices echoed, "To Angel Mom." Margaret stood there surrounded by people who loved her, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't the life she'd planned. This wasn't anything she could have imagined a year ago, when she was packing boxes and preparing to lose everything. But it was hers, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Later that night, after the food was eaten and the presents were opened and the children had finally crashed from exhaustion, Margaret stepped outside for some air. Walt found her on the porch. "Cold out here," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. "I needed a minute." She took the cup gratefully. "It's a lot. All of this. Too much." "No," she smiled. "Just different. Good different." They stood in comfortable silence watching the stars. "I've been thinking," Walt said finally. "Dangerous habit." "Funny." He took a breath. "I've been thinking about what you said in the hospital, about who I am without the motorcycle. And you were right. I'm more than just a rider. I'm a father, a grandfather." He looked at her. A friend. The best kind. I want to do more. I want to help people the way you helped me. He paused. I was thinking about volunteering, maybe at a veterans center or one of those programs for at-risk kids. Margaret felt her heart swell. I think that's a wonderful idea. You do, Gunti. Walt, you have 50 years of experience, stories that would blow people's minds, wisdom that young people desperately need. She nudged his shoulder. Plus, you're stubborn as hell. Those kids won't know what hit them. Walt laughed, a real laugh, full and warm. Thanks, Margaret, for believing in me. Always. They went back inside together. The party was winding down. People were gathering their things, saying goodbyes, making plans for next year. Linda caught Margaret at the door. Same time next year. Margaret looked around the room, at the bikers who'd become her brothers, at the women who'd become her sisters, at the children who called her Aunt Maggie, at Walt surrounded by his daughter and grandchildren, looking happier than she'd ever seen him. She thought about the empty house she'd left behind in Montana, the silence that used to crush her, the loneliness that had almost destroyed her. That woman felt like a stranger now. Same time next year, she said. Linda hugged her tight. Drive safe, Angel Mom. Always do. Margaret walked to her car, the cold air sharp in her lungs, the stars bright overhead. 1 year ago, she'd been ready to give up, ready to lose everything, ready to disappear into a world that didn't seem to want her anymore. Now she had a job she loved, a family that chose her, a purpose that made every day worth living, all because she'd opened a door to a stranger in a storm. She started the car and headed home. The road stretched out ahead of her, dark and quiet and full of possibility. 2 years had passed since the night Margaret opened her door to a dying stranger. She thought about that sometimes, how one decision, one moment of courage had changed everything. The woman who'd been ready to give up, who'd been packing boxes and preparing for homelessness, seemed like a ghost from another life. Now Margaret Thompson was 70 years old, and she'd never been busier. The workshops had grown into something bigger than she'd ever imagined. What started as a simple community presentation had become a full-fledged training program for caregivers across Montana. Margaret had written a curriculum, trained instructors, and established partnerships with hospitals and nursing homes throughout the state. You're building an empire, Karen told her during their monthly meeting. I'm building a support system, Margaret corrected. There's a difference. Whatever you call it, it's working. The state health department wants to replicate your model nationwide. Margaret set down her coffee cup. What? They're impressed, Margaret. The outcomes for families in your program are remarkable. Lower hospitalization rates, better quality of life for patients, reduced caregiver burnout. Karen slid a folder across the desk. They want to fly you to Washington next month. Present your findings to a congressional committee. A congressional committee, the Committee on Aging. They're developing new legislation for elder care, and they want your input. Margaret stared at the folder like it might bite her. I'm not a policy expert. I'm just a retired nurse who revolutionized caregiving in rural America. Karen leaned forward. Margaret, do you have any idea what you've accomplished? In 2 years, you've trained over 300 caregivers. You've helped thousands of families navigate the worst moments of their lives. You've created a model that could change how this entire country treats its elderly population. I was just doing my job. No, you were doing your calling. There's a difference. The trip to Washington was overwhelming. Margaret had never been to the Capitol before. She'd never testified before anyone more important than a hospital administrator. And now she was sitting in front of 15 senators explaining why elderly Americans deserve better care. Mrs. Thompson, the committee chairman said, your written testimony mentioned something called the Angel Mom model. Can you explain what that means? Margaret took a deep breath. It's named after what a motorcycle club started calling me. The Hells Angels. Murmurs rippled through the room. I know that sounds strange, but 2 years ago, a member of that club almost died in a snowstorm outside my home. I took him in, saved his life. In return, they saved mine. She paused. Those men taught me something important. They taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. It's about caring for people who need it, regardless of who they are or where they come from. The chairman leaned forward. And how does that translate into your caregiving model? The Angel Mom model is built on three principles. First, nobody should die alone. Second, every family deserves support during difficult times. Third, kindness creates kindness. Margaret's voice strengthened. When we invest in caring for our elderly, we don't just help them. We help entire communities. We reduce healthcare costs. We strengthen family bonds. We create networks of support that ripple outward in ways we can't predict. Can you give us an example? Margaret thought about Walt, about Rosa and Eddie, about Sarah and her grandchildren, about the hundreds of families she'd worked with over the past 2 years. 2 years ago, I was about to lose my home. I was 68 years old, widowed, childless, and alone. I had no money, no family, no hope. She met the chairman's eyes. One stranger changed everything. I opened my door to a man I didn't know, and that one act of kindness created a chain reaction that transformed my life. Now I have a career, a family, a purpose, all because I helped one person who needed it. She leaned forward. That's what the Angel Mom model is about. It's about believing that every act of kindness matters, that every person we help might go on to help someone else, that investing in care isn't just morally right, it's economically smart and socially essential. The room was silent. Then the chairman nodded slowly. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. That was the most compelling testimony we've heard all year. The legislation passed 6 months later. The Angel Mom Act, they called it. $50 million in federal funding for rural caregiving programs, grants for training facilities, subsidies for families caring for elderly relatives at home. Margaret watched the signing ceremony on television from her living room in Montana, surrounded by people she loved. Walt was there, of course, thinner now, moving slower, but still sharp as ever. Sarah had driven up from Portland with the grandkids. Linda and Mike had flown in from Nevada. Even Rosa Vasquez, now 84 and still stubborn as hell, had made the trip from Reno. They named it after you, Walt said, pointing at the screen. They named it after all of us. Margaret looked around the room. None of this would have happened without you. Bullshit. This happened because you opened your door 2 years ago. Everything else just followed. Walt, don't argue with me. I'm too old and too stubborn. He took her hand. You changed my life, Margaret. You changed all our lives. Let us be grateful. Margaret squeezed his hand. Fine. You can be grateful, but I'm still saying it was a team effort. Stubborn woman. Damn right. Spring came early that year. Margaret was in her garden, the garden the Hells Angels had planted for her when the phone rang. Mrs. Thompson, this is Jennifer Walsh from the National Foundation for Senior Care. Yes. I'm calling to inform you that you've been selected as this year's recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Elder Care. Margaret nearly dropped her gardening trowel. I'm sorry, what? The awards ceremony is in New York next month. We'll fly you out, put you up in a hotel, the whole package. Jennifer's voice was warm. Congratulations, Mrs. Thompson. You've earned this. I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept. Margaret thought about the past 2 years, the struggles, the triumphs, the thousands of small moments that had led to this one phone call. I'll accept, she said. The award ceremony was held at the Waldorf Astoria. Margaret had never seen anything so fancy in her life. Crystal chandeliers, tables set with more silverware than she knew what to do with, men in tuxedos and women in gowns that probably cost more than her car. She felt completely out of place. You look beautiful, Linda said, adjusting Margaret's collar. Stop fidgeting. I feel like a fraud. You feel like someone who's not used to being recognized. Linda stepped back. Get used to it. You've earned every bit of this. The Hells Angels had shown up in force, 20 of them dressed in suits instead of leather jackets, a sight that made Margaret laugh until she cried. They looked so uncomfortable, tugging at their collars and shifting in their dress shoes. This is torture, Mike muttered. This is support, Linda corrected. Smile and deal with it. Walt was seated at Margaret's table along with Sarah and her family. He looked distinguished in his suit, even if he complained about the tie cutting off his circulation. You nervous? He asked. Terrified. Good, means you care. He patted her hand. You're going to be great. The ceremony began. Margaret sat through speeches and awards she barely registered. Her mind was elsewhere on the speech she'd have to give, on the words she'd practiced 100 times but still couldn't remember. Then they called her name. And now the recipient of this year's Lifetime Achievement Award for Excellence in Elder Care, Margaret Thompson. The room erupted in applause. Margaret stood on legs that felt like jelly. She walked to the podium, gripping her note cards so hard they crumpled in her hands. The lights were blinding. The crowd was a blur of faces. She opened her mouth to speak. Nothing came out. Panic seized her. She'd forgotten everything. Every word she'd practiced, every story she'd planned to tell, gone. Then she saw Walt. He was standing in the back of the room next to Mike and the other Hells Angels. He caught her eye and nodded once slowly. "You've got this," the nod said. "I believe in you." Margaret took a deep breath. 2 years ago, she began. "I almost died. Not physically, though that came close too, but spiritually. I was 68 years old and I had given up. I had lost my husband. I had lost my son. I had lost my home, my savings, my hope. I was ready to disappear." The room was silent. Then a stranger knocked on my door. He was dying, too literally, dying, freezing to death in a blizzard. I had every reason to turn him away. He was a Hells Angel, a biker, someone society had taught me to fear. She paused. But I opened the door anyway. I let him in. I saved his life. Her voice strengthened, and in return, he saved mine. She looked out at the crowd. That's what caregiving is really about. It's not about medicine or procedures or paperwork. It's about human connection. It's about seeing someone who's suffering and choosing to help even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when you have nothing left to give. She thought about Danny, about Frank, about all the losses that had shaped her. I spent 41 years as a nurse. I thought I understood caregiving, but I did not really, not until I was the one who needed care. Not until I experienced what it felt like to be seen, to be valued, to be saved by people who had no obligation to help me. Her eyes found Walt again. The man I saved that night, his name is Walt. He's here tonight along with dozens of his brothers. They're the ones who taught me what family really means. They're the ones who showed me that kindness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we have. She lifted her award. This belongs to all of them. To every caregiver who's ever held a dying patient's hand. To every family member who's sacrificed everything to care for someone they love. To every stranger who's opened their door to someone in need. Her voice cracked. We don't do this work for awards. We do it because it matters. Because every person deserves dignity at the end of their life. Because kindness is contagious and every act of compassion creates ripples we can't see. She took a final breath. 2 years ago, I opened my door to a stranger. That stranger became my family. That family gave me back my life. She smiled through her tears. If my story proves anything, it's this: it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to find your purpose. And it's never too late to open your door to someone who needs you. The room exploded in applause. Margaret stood at the podium, tears streaming down her face, watching 50 Hells Angels give her a standing ovation in the middle of the Waldorf Astoria. She'd never felt more alive. The party afterward was everything Margaret expected and nothing she was prepared for. People she'd never met wanted to shake her hand, take her photo, tell her their own stories of caregiving and loss. She smiled until her face hurt and talked until her voice gave out. Around midnight, she escaped to a quiet balcony. Walt found her there 10 minutes later, hiding, recovering. He laughed and handed her a glass of champagne. Hell of a speech. I forgot everything I planned to say. I know. That's why it was good. He leaned against the railing beside her. The real stuff always comes out when you stop trying to control it. They stood in comfortable silence. Margaret, Walt said finally, there's something I need to tell you. She looked at him. Something in his voice made her heart skip. What is it? I went to the doctor last week, routine checkup. He paused. My heart's getting worse. Margaret felt the world tilt. How much worse? They're talking about a transplant, but at my age with my history, he shrugged. The odds aren't great. Walt, don't. He held up a hand. I didn't tell you this so you'd worry. I told you because I want you to know how grateful I am for everything. You're not dying on me, Margaret said fiercely. I won't allow it. You might not have a choice. The hell I don't. She grabbed his arm. We're getting second opinions, third opinions. We're going to the best hospitals in the country. Margaret, his voice was gentle. Stop. She stopped. I've lived a good life, longer than I deserved, honestly. He took her hand. Upton, but these last 2 years since you saved me in that snowstorm, they've been the best years of all. I got to reconcile with my daughter. I got to meet my grandchildren. I got to be part of something bigger than myself. His eyes glistened. Whatever time I have left, I'm going to spend it being grateful, not scared. He squeezed her hand. And I need you to promise me something. What? When I'm gone, and I will be gone sooner or later than we all will, I need you to keep going. Keep teaching, keep helping people, keep opening doors for strangers. Walt, I can't talk about this. You can, and you will. His voice was firm. Because that's your legacy, Margaret. Not some award, not some legislation. The legacy is the lives you touch, the kindness you spread, the doors you open. Margaret couldn't speak. The tears were falling too fast. Walt pulled her into a hug. Thank you, he whispered, for everything, for saving my life, for being my family, for reminding me that it's never too late to change. Thank you for knocking on my door, she whispered back. Best decision I ever made. They held each other for a long time. Walt didn't die that year. Or the next. The doctors were baffled. His heart damaged as it was kept beating. His body old as it was kept fighting. He joked that he was too stubborn to die, that the angel of death had taken one look at him and decided not to bother. You're not stubborn, Margaret told him. You're just not done yet. Neither are you. She wasn't. Over the next 3 years, Margaret expanded her program to 15 states. She trained thousands of caregivers. She testified before Congress twice more. She wrote a book about her experiences that became a bestseller, not because she was a good writer, but because people were hungry for stories of hope. The Hells Angels stayed in her life. They visited, they called, they showed up at her birthday parties and her award ceremonies and every major moment in between. Mike retired as president and handed the club over to a younger man, but he and Linda remained fixtures in Margaret's world. Sarah became like a daughter to her. The grandchildren, now teenagers, called her Grandma Maggie. Walt's family had become her family just as he'd promised. Rosa Vasquez lived to see her 87th birthday before passing peacefully in her sleep. Eddie called Margaret that night sobbing. She asked about you at the end, he said. She said you were the best friend she ever had. Margaret cried for hours, but she kept going. She always kept going. On her 75th birthday, they threw her a party at the Hells Angels clubhouse in Nevada. Over 200 people showed up, bikers and nurses, senators and social workers, families she'd helped and caregivers she'd trained. People from every corner of her life gathered to celebrate a woman who had almost given up 5 years ago. Walt gave the toast. He was 80 now, frail and thin, relying on a walker to get around. But his voice was still strong, his eyes still sharp. 5 years ago, he said, I knocked on a stranger's door in the middle of a blizzard. I was dying. I had given up. I thought my life was over. He raised his glass. I was wrong. My life was just beginning. Because that stranger, that beautiful, stubborn, impossible woman, didn't just save my body. She saved my soul. She showed me that it's never too late to change. Never too late to love. Never too late to be the person you were always meant to be. He looked at Margaret. Happy birthday, Angel Mom. Thank you for opening your door. The room erupted in cheers. Margaret stood, tears streaming down her face, surrounded by the family she'd never expected to have. She thought about Frank, who would have loved all of this. She thought about Danny, who she still missed every single day. She thought about the scared, lonely woman who had been packing boxes 5 years ago, preparing to lose everything. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who had learned that the worst moments of your life can become the beginning of something beautiful if you're brave enough to open the door. Thank you, she said to the crowd. Thank you all for everything. She didn't have the words to express what she felt. How could she? How could anyone capture what it meant to be saved by strangers, to build a family from nothing, to find purpose in the twilight of your life? So she just said what was true. I love you, all of you. You're my family. You're my home. She lifted her glass to kindness, to second chance, and to opening doors for strangers. To opening doors, the crowd echoed. They drank, they laughed, they celebrated until dawn. And Margaret Thompson, angel mom, caregiver legend, looked around at the life she had built from the ashes of despair and knew with absolute certainty that every tear had been worth it. Every loss had led her here. Every closed door had prepared her to open the one that mattered. Walt found her on the porch as the sun came up. Still awake, he asked. Couldn't sleep. Too happy. He lowered himself into the chair beside her, groaning at the effort. Hell of a party. Hell of a life. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Margaret, Walt said finally, yes. Do you ever regret it? Opening the door that night, she thought about it, really thought about it. The fear, the uncertainty, the moment she'd seen the Hells Angels patch and almost slammed the door in his face. What if she had? What if she'd let fear win? She would have lost everything. Not just her house, but her hope, her purpose, her family. She would have died alone, forgotten, empty. Instead, she had this, all of this. No, she said firmly, not for 1 second. Walt smiled. Me neither. He reached over and took her hand. They sat there together, two old survivors, watching the sun rise on another day. The road ahead was uncertain. Walt's heart could fail at any moment. Margaret's body was slowing down. Time was running out, as it always did. But that was okay, because they had today. They had each other. They had a family that stretched across the country, bound not by blood, but by something stronger, by kindness, by gratitude, by the simple act of opening a door to someone who needed help. Hey, Margaret, Walt said. Yeah. Thanks for saving my life. She squeezed his hand. Thanks for saving mine. The sun rose higher, a new day began, and somewhere in Montana, a door stood waiting to be opened. Because that's how it works. That's how it always works. One act of kindness leads to another. One open door leads to 1,000 more. And a life that seems over can become the beginning of something extraordinary. All you have to do is open the door. Margaret Thompson did, and it changed everything.